The most underrated armor is footwear. We are accustomed to thinking of armor as something that protects the torso and head, but for a Roman legionnaire, whose main strength lay in his ability to march dozens of kilometers a day and then engage in combat, it was footwear that was the basis of survival and combat effectiveness. A legionnaire's clothing was not just a set of items to cover the body, it was a carefully thought-out system where each element performed its function, turning a person into an effective combat unit. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple woolen scarf could save a legionnaire's life in battle, and why abandoning one element of this system could lead to the defeat of an entire legion. When we talk about Roman weaponry, the gladius, scutum, and larica come to mind. However, the foundation on which the entire power of the legion rested was the caliga, a military sandal. This was not just footwear, but a complex engineering device designed for long marches and combat. The design of the caliga was ingenious in its simplicity. It consisted of several layers of thick oxhide held together by a complex system of straps that tightly encircled the foot and ankle. The open design provided ventilation, which was critical for preventing skin diseases during multi-day marches. The main feature of the caliga was its sole, densely studded with iron spikes. Each sandal had between 80 and 100 such spikes, which served several purposes. They protected the leather sole from wear and tear, allowing a single pair of shoes to last for months in the harshest conditions. The spikes provided the legionnaire with excellent traction on any surface, whether slippery clay, rocky trails, or wet grass. This gave Roman soldiers an advantage in maneuverability, both on the march and in battle. Where the enemy slipped and lost their balance, the legionnaire stood firm. But the main function of the spikes as a weapon was in close combat. An enemy who fell and found himself under the feet of a legionnaire was doomed. The weight of the soldier, multiplied by dozens of sharp iron spikes, turned a simple step into a crushing blow capable of immobilizing any enemy. In addition, the march of an entire legion shot in caligae created a unique psychological effect. The rhythmic, loud clang of thousands of spikes on the ground could be heard from afar and instilled fear in the enemy even before the battle began. This sound became one of the symbols of the inexorable approach of the Roman war machine. It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where are you from? Do you agree with the arguments presented? The caliga was also a status symbol. It was worn by everyone from simple legionaries to centurions, and even the emperor. The nickname of Emperor Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, Caligula, literally means little boot, and comes from the children's caligae he wore while living with his father in a military camp. The durability and reliability of this footwear allowed the legions to make their legendary forced marches. A legion could march up to 40 kilometers a day in full gear, and this was largely due to the caliga. Without this footwear, the Roman army would never have been able to achieve such mobility. Thus, the caliga was not just an item of clothing, but a multifunctional tool. It provided mobility, protection, psychological pressure, and was a formidable weapon in close combat. It was with this seemingly simple sandal that the Roman legionnaire began. Underneath layers of armor and straps, every Roman soldier wore a tunic. At first glance, it seems like the simplest piece of clothing, but its role in the equipment system was critically important. The health and combat effectiveness of a legionnaire depended on the quality and condition of his tunic. Roman military tunics were made primarily from wool. This material was chosen for a reason. Wool retains heat well even when wet, wicks moisture away from the body, and has natural antibacterial properties. In conditions where clothes were rarely washed, this was vital. The color of military tunics was most often not white, as shown in movies, but various shades of red or undyed wool. Red pigments were relatively cheap and durable, and besides, dirt was less noticeable on a red background. Uniformity of color also played a role in creating the image of a disciplined and unified army. The cut of the tunic was as simple and functional as possible. It consisted of two rectangular pieces of fabric sewn together at the shoulders and sides, with slits for the head and arms. The length of the military tunic was strictly regulated. It reached approximately to the knees so as not to restrict movement in battle. For a legionnaire, the tunic was the first line of defense against adverse weather conditions. In cold weather, soldiers could wear 2 or even 3 tunics, creating air pockets for better insulation. In hot weather, the woolen tunic, oddly enough, helped regulate body temperature by absorbing sweat and slowly evaporating it. The tunic also protected the skin from rubbing against rough belts and armor. Direct contact of metal or stiff leather with the body during days of marching could cause serious skin damage. The tunic served as a soft lining to prevent this. A soldier's status could be reflected in the quality of his tunic. Officers and centurions could afford tunics made of finer wool or linen with higher quality dyes. However, the basic cut and functionality remained the same for the entire army. The condition of the tunic was an indicator of a soldier's discipline and care for his equipment. A torn or dirty tunic had to be repaired immediately and washed at the earliest opportunity. Commanders strictly monitored hygiene and the condition of clothing, understanding that the combat effectiveness of the entire unit depended on it. Repairing tunics was a real art for legionnaires. Every soldier had to be able to mend holes, patch tears, and reinforce areas of greatest wear. Needles, thread, and small pieces of fabric for patches were always kept in the campaign bag. Experienced legionnaires became skilled tailors out of necessity, passing on their skills to new recruits. The tunic also played an important role in identifying and organizing troops. Different legions and cohorts sometimes wore tunics of slightly different shades of red or with special decorative elements, colored stripes on the shoulders or hem. This helped commanders quickly recognize their units in the heat of battle and facilitated the coordination of large military formations. In some cases, tunics were decorated with embroidered symbols or legion numbers, which strengthened corporate spirit and pride in belonging to a particular unit. Caring for the tunic was part of a legionnaire's daily routine. After a march, it was aired out, cleaned of dirt, and if possible, washed in cold water. Wool did not require frequent washing, which was a great advantage in camping conditions. But the simple tunic was only the foundation. In the next chapter, we will reveal the secret of a little-known piece of clothing that was worn between the tunic and the armor, and on which the legionnaire's survival directly depended. Between the legionnaire's tunic and his armor was another, often overlooked but vitally important piece of clothing, the subarmalis. It was a kind of quilted jacket or vest designed to absorb blows and protect the body. Without the subarmalis, even the most durable armor would have been much less effective. The subarmalis was made of several layers of linen or felt quilted together. Its thickness and cut could vary, but its main purpose remained the same: to absorb the kinetic energy of an impact. Metal armor could stop a blade, but the force of the blow was still transmitted to the body, and it was the subarmalis that absorbed this force. This piece of clothing also served as thermal insulation. Metal armor quickly heated up in the sun and cooled down in the cold. The subarmalis created a barrier between the metal and the body, helping to maintain a comfortable temperature and avoid overheating or overcooling. In addition, the subarmalis prevented the armor from rubbing against the skin. Heavy and stiff lorica, especially segmentata, could cause serious damage with constant movement. The soft padding of the subarmalis protected the soldier's shoulders, back, and chest, allowing him to operate effectively for long periods of time. The design of the subarmalis often included pterygia, strips of leather or quilted fabric hanging from the shoulders and belt. These elements provided additional protection for areas not covered by the main armor, such as the shoulder joints and upper thighs. They created a multi-layered defense that was difficult to penetrate. The weight of the subarmalis added to the overall weight of the equipment, but its usefulness far outweighed this disadvantage. A legionnaire in full armor was protected not just by a layer of metal, but by an entire system of fabric, felt, and metal working together. Each layer performed its own unique function. The materials for the subarmalis were selected for their shock-absorbing properties. Flax folded into several layers and stitched together created a dense but flexible structure. Pressed wool felt was an even more effective shock absorber, but it was heavier and less resistant to moisture. Wearing armor without a subarmalis was practically unthinkable. Even if a legionnaire survived a strong blow that did not pierce his lorica, he could suffer serious internal injuries. The subarmalis was the element that transformed armor from simple protection against cuts into a full-fledged damage absorption system. This piece of equipment is rarely mentioned in popular sources, but archaeological finds and images on bas-reliefs confirm its widespread use. The subarmalis was an integral part of Roman armor, a silent and unnoticed hero that saved thousands of lives. Thus, the legionnaire's defense system was much more complex than it seems. It began with a tunic, continued with a shock-absorbing subarmalis, and ended with an outer layer of metal armor. It was this thoughtful, multi-layered approach that made the Roman soldier so difficult to defeat. Lorica is the general name for Roman armor, which was the pinnacle of defensive technology of its time. There were several types of lorica, but each was designed to provide maximum protection while maintaining mobility. It was the lorica that allowed legionnaires to withstand a barrage of blows and continue fighting. The most famous type is segmentata lorica, plate armor that became a symbol of the Roman Empire. It consisted of horizontal strips of iron attached to internal leather straps. This design provided excellent protection against slashing and stabbing blows by distributing their force over a large area. The main advantage of lorica segmentata was its flexibility. The segments of the armor could move relative to each other, giving the soldier greater freedom of movement than a solid armor. A legionnaire could freely bend, turn, and raise his arms, which was critically important in battle. The fastening system with straps and buckles allowed the armor to be adjusted to fit a specific soldier. This ensured a snug fit and prevented the armor from shifting during active movements. Properly fitted, lorica became a second skin for the legionnaire. Segmentata lorica also had well-designed shoulder protection. Large shoulder pads consisting of several segments reliably covered one of the most vulnerable areas. They did not interfere with arm movements and effectively deflected blows from above. However, this armor also had its drawbacks. Its complex design required constant maintenance. Leather straps could wear out, and metal fasteners could break. Repairing segmentata lorica in the field was a difficult task and required special skills and tools. Another type of armor was the lorica hamata, or chainmail. It consisted of thousands of small iron rings connected to each other. Chainmail was more flexible than segmentata and provided better protection against cutting blows, but it was vulnerable to powerful thrusting attacks. Lorica squamata, or scale armor, consisted of many small metal plates sewn onto a fabric or leather base. This type of armor combined good mobility with reliable protection, especially against blows from above. Scale armor was often used by cavalry and standard bearers. The choice of lorica type depended on the era, region, and specific unit. During the heyday of the empire, legionaries most often wore lorica segmentata, while auxiliary troops and cavalry preferred chainmail or scale armor. Each type of armor had its own advantages and was intended for specific tactical tasks. However, segmented armor was not the only type of protection. In the next chapter, you will learn about another type of armor that was older but had been used for centuries. Long before the famous lorica segmentata appeared, and throughout the history of Rome, legionaries used another, equally effective type of armor, lorica hamata, or chainmail. Apparently invented by the Celts, this technology was perfected by the Romans and became the standard for many centuries. Chainmail was a compromise between protection and mobility. Lorica cauda was made from thousands of iron or steel rings with a diameter of 5 to 10 millimeters. Each ring was connected to 4 adjacent rings, creating a dense and flexible fabric. The manufacturing process was extremely labor-intensive. Each ring had to be forged, the ends had to be brought together and riveted. The main advantage of chainmail was its exceptional flexibility. It did not restrict the soldier's movements, allowing him to move, run, and fight freely. Unlike rigid armor, chainmail followed the contours of the body, providing comfort during prolonged wear. Lorica hamada provided excellent protection against cutting and slashing blows. The blade of a sword sliding over the surface of the rings could not inflict a deep cut. The weight of the armor, which could reach 10-15 kilograms, also helped to dampen the force of the blow. Early Roman chainmail was short, sleeveless, and had special shoulder pads to protect the shoulders. Over time, their design changed. They became longer and short sleeves appeared. This provided greater body protection. However, chainmail had its weaknesses. It was vulnerable to powerful thrusting blows from spears or arrows with armor-piercing tips. The rings could come apart or break under strong pressure applied to a single point. In addition, the weight of the chainmail fell entirely on the soldier's shoulders. This created a heavy load and could lead to rapid fatigue. To partially solve this problem, legionnaires used a wide belt that redistributed some of the weight to the hips. Caring for lorica hamada was easier than for segmentata, but it also required attention. To prevent rusting, chainmail had to be cleaned regularly with sand and oil. Damaged rings could be replaced right in the field, which was a big advantage. Despite the emergence of more modern types of armor, lorica hamada never completely fell out of use. It continued to be used by auxiliary troops, cavalrymen, and legionaries in certain regions. Its flexibility and reliability made it indispensable in many situations. Even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, chainmail remained the main type of armor in Europe throughout the early Middle Ages. This shows how successful and effective this technology was. The Romans did not invent chainmail, but they perfected it and ensured its thousand-year history. In addition to plate and chainmail armor, the Roman army had another interesting type of protection in its arsenal: lorica squamata, or scale armor. This type of armor, which probably came from the East, combined elements of flexibility and rigid protection. Outwardly, it resembled the scales of a fish or reptile, which gave the warrior an imposing appearance. Lorica squamata consisted of hundreds of small metal plates, or scales, sewn onto a base of thick fabric or leather. The scales were arranged in an overlapping pattern so that each subsequent plate covered the joint of the previous ones. This created a continuous protective covering with no obvious vulnerabilities. The scales were made of iron or bronze. Each plate had a rounded bottom edge and several holes at the top for attachment to the base. The size and shape of the scales could vary, but the design principle remained the same. The main advantage of scale armor was its ability to deflect blows. Thanks to the slanted position of the plates, the blade of a sword or the tip of an arrow often slipped off without causing harm. This system was especially effective against blows from above. Lorica squamata was more flexible than lorica segmentata, but less mobile than chainmail. It provided good protection for the torso, but could somewhat restrict the movement of the arms and body. Therefore, it was often preferred by warriors who did not require maximum freedom of movement, such as standard bearers, musicians, or officers. Scaled armor was also popular among Roman cavalry. Protection from blows from above and from the side was important for horsemen, and lorica squamata excelled at this task. In addition, the scaled armor, shining in the sun, looked very impressive, emphasizing the elite status of the cavalrymen. Despite its advantages, lorica squamata also had its drawbacks. It was vulnerable to blows delivered from below. A sharp blade could get under a scale and pierce the protective base. Repairing such armor was quite laborious. If the base was torn, it was necessary to unstitch and reattach a large number of plates. However, replacing individual damaged scales was a relatively simple task. Lorica squamata was not as widespread in the legions as segmentata or hamada, but it remained an important part of Roman military equipment. It demonstrates the Romans' willingness to borrow and adapt the best military technologies from other peoples. This armor was another tool in their diverse arsenal. Now that we have reviewed the main types of body armor, in the next chapter you will learn how the Romans protected the most important part of the body, Head protection was an absolute priority for any warrior, and the Romans approached this issue with the utmost seriousness. The Roman helmet, known as a galea or calcei, was not just a metal helmet. It was a complex protective system that had evolved over centuries to counter specific threats on the battlefield. Early Roman helmets, such as the Montefortino type, had a simple hemispherical shape with a small neck guard. They were modeled after Celtic helmets and provided basic protection against blows from above. Their main purpose was to deflect a sword's slashing blow. Over time, the design of the helmet became more complex. Wide neck guards appeared, protecting the warrior's neck from blows from behind, one of the most common tactics of Rome's enemies. This element became the hallmark of imperial helmets. The most important innovation was the large cheek guards. They were attached with hinges and protected the warrior's face, leaving only the eyes, nose, and mouth exposed. The cheek guards not only protected against direct blows, but also prevented the blade from sliding down to the neck. During the Empire period, a visor or stiffening rib appeared on helmets above the forehead. This detail was added to protect against slashing blows to the face. The enemy's blade would hit this rib and slide to the side without harming the warrior. Helmets were made of iron or bronze. Inside the helmet had a leather or felt lining that cushioned blows and made it comfortable to wear. Without such a lining, even a blow that did not pierce the helmet could cause serious head injury. Many helmets had a crest attachment at the top. Crests made of horsehair or feathers, painted in bright colors, served not only as decoration. They helped to visually increase the soldier's height, making him more impressive, and also served to identify officers. Centurions wore a transverse crest. The helmet weighed about 2 kilograms. It was a significant burden, but that was the price of safety. Legionnaires were trained to wear helmets for many hours without discomfort. Different types of imperial helmets, such as the imperial Gallic and imperial Italic, differed in detail but retained the same basic principles. They had reinforced forehead protection, large cheek guards, and a wide neck guard. Each detail was the result of analysis of combat experience and served to counter specific threats. The helmet was not just protection, but also a symbol of belonging to the Roman army. Its recognizable shape instilled fear in enemies and a sense of unity in the legionaries themselves. Losing a helmet in battle was considered a great disgrace, equivalent to losing a shield. One of the most recognizable but often misunderstood elements of a legionnaire's equipment was the cingulum militare, the military belt. It was much more than just a device for carrying a sword. The cingulum was a status symbol, an element of psychological influence, and even provided some additional protection. The cingulum consisted of a sturdy leather belt decorated with metal plates. The plates were made of bronze or iron and were often covered with tin or silver. They not only decorated the belt, but also made it stronger and stiffer. Attached to the front of the belt was a so-called apron, consisting of several leather straps hanging down. Each of these straps was studded with large metal rivets and ended with a metal pendant. This element is a subject of controversy among historians. One of the functions of the apron was purely decorative and status-related. The richly decorated belt showed that its owner was a soldier, not a civilian. It was a sign of pride in belonging to the military caste. Another function was acoustic. When walking, the metal parts of the apron made a characteristic clanking sound. When thousands of legionnaires marched in unison, this sound merged into a powerful rumble, which, together with the clanking of the caliga, exerted strong psychological pressure on the enemy. Some historians believe that the apron also provided limited protection for the groin area. Although it could not stop a direct thrust, it could deflect or weaken a slashing blow. The multitude of moving straps prevented the enemy's blade from reaching its target. The legionnaire carried his main weapons on his belt. The gladius was attached on the right and the pugio dagger on the left. The sturdy construction of the cingulum allowed the scabbards to be securely fastened and provided quick access to weapons at any time. Losing one's belt was considered a serious disciplinary offense and a disgrace for a soldier. It was tantamount to an admission of cowardice or negligence. In some cases, a legionnaire could be severely punished for losing his cingulum. Outside of service, the belt was removed, as wearing military equipment in peaceful cities was restricted. The cingulum was a clear marker that distinguished a soldier on duty from an ordinary citizen. Thus, the cingulum was a multifunctional element. It served to carry weapons, was a symbol of status and pride, an instrument of psychological warfare, and possibly an element of additional protection. It shows once again how well thought out the equipment of a Roman soldier was.
Forward!
The combat effectiveness of an army depends not only on weapons and armor, but also on the health of its soldiers. The Romans understood this perfectly well, which is why their equipment included items of clothing designed to protect against the weather and prevent disease. These items included the focal scarf and the sagum cloak. The focale was a piece of wool or linen cloth that legionaries tied around their necks. Its main function was to protect the neck from chafing against the edges of armor and helmets. Constant friction of metal against the skin could lead to irritation and wounds, which was very dangerous in the unsanitary conditions of a campaign. In addition, the focal absorbed sweat, preventing it from dripping under the armor. This helped maintain hygiene and prevented the metal parts of the lorica from rusting from the inside. In cold weather, the woolen scarf also provided additional warmth. The sagum was a military cloak worn by every legionnaire. It was made of thick, dense wool and had a simple rectangular shape. This cloak was indispensable in cold and rainy weather. The wool of the sagum was treated with lanolin, a natural fat that made the fabric virtually waterproof. During rain, a legionnaire could cover himself with his cloak and keep his body and equipment dry. This was critical for preventing hypothermia. At night, the saguma served as a blanket. Soldiers slept under the open sky or in simple tents, and the warm cloak was the only thing that protected them from the night cold. The ability to rest well and regain strength directly affected their combat effectiveness the next day. The cloak could also be used in combat. A legionnaire could wrap it around his left arm, creating an improvised shield to deflect blows. Although this was a last resort, it could save a life if the main shield was lost or damaged. The color of the saguma was usually dark, brown, gray, or dark red. This made soldiers less visible in the terrain, especially at night. The bright cloaks often shown in movies were worn mainly by officers and praetorians on ceremonial occasions. There was also another type of cloak, the pinula. It was a kind of hooded poncho that provided even better protection from the rain. The pinula was especially popular in the northern provinces with cold and wet climates, such as Britain and Germany. Thus, the focal and sagum were not just accessories, but vital pieces of equipment. They protected legionaries from the elements and helped them stay healthy and combat-ready in the harshest conditions. This proves once again that the Romans left no stone unturned when it came to the effectiveness of their army. Having examined each individual element of the complex and well-thought-out Roman military attire separately, it is extremely important to understand a fundamental truth. Its true, indestructible strength lay not in the superiority of any one component, but in a revolutionary, systematic approach to creating a universal combat kit. No single item, no matter how perfect, made a Roman legionnaire an absolutely invincible warrior on the battlefield. It was their carefully thought-out combination, harmonious interaction, and synergistic effect that transformed the most ordinary person from a provincial town or village into a universal, highly effective soldier capable of solving a wide variety of combat tasks in any climatic conditions and on any terrain. The entire ingenious system of Roman military clothing was based on the fundamental principles of scientifically based multi-layering, where each layer performed its specific function in the overall protection system. The basic wool tunic, made from high-quality sheep's wool, effectively wickered excess moisture away from the soldier's body, maintaining an optimal temperature and preventing hypothermia or overheating during intense combat. The intermediate quilted subarmalis, stuffed with soft organic materials, served as an excellent shock absorber that absorbed and dissipated the kinetic energy of blows, significantly reducing their destructive effect on the warrior's body. The outer metal lorica, whether chainmail, plate, or segmented armor, took the brunt of the enemy's direct attacks, deflecting blows from swords, spears, and arrows. Each subsequent layer not only complemented the previous one, but also created a synergistic effect, as a result of which the overall effectiveness of the protection greatly exceeded the sum of the protective properties of the individual elements, forming a truly comprehensive and virtually impenetrable defensive system. The strategic mobility of the Roman legions was reliably ensured by ingeniously designed military footwear. The famous caligae, which were a true engineering masterpiece of the ancient world. These durable but surprisingly lightweight sandals with metal spikes on the soles allowed the legions to cover truly enormous distances across a wide variety of terrain, from rocky mountain trails to swampy plains, from sandy deserts to snow-covered northern plains. Thanks to this excellent footwear, the Roman army always arrived at the decisive battle fresh, full of strength, and absolutely ready for immediate combat, which gave the legions a colossal tactical advantage over their enemies. Without this critically important foundation of mobility, all other, even the most sophisticated weapons and defense systems would lose their strategic significance and tactical effectiveness. Roman military engineers understood that a stationary, even superbly armed army was an easy target for a maneuverable enemy. The Roman legionnaires' protection was not randomly placed, but scientifically and strategically distributed throughout the warrior's body in accordance with human anatomy and combat injury statistics. A massive bronze or iron helmet with protective cheek guards and a neck guard reliably covered the most vulnerable parts of the head and neck, protecting the brain and spine from fatal injuries. Heavy metal armor of various designs completely protected the vital torso with the heart, lungs, and other internal organs, while the famous large rectangular scutum shield, made of several layers of wood and covered with leather with a metal umbo, allowed the legionnaire to cover almost his entire body from enemy projectiles. Even the seemingly insignificant leather belt, decorated with metal plates, made a significant contribution to the overall protection of the warrior, covering the abdomen and lumbar region, as well as serving as a basis for attaching a sword and dagger. Each element of this system was positioned with maximum protection in mind while maintaining mobility and combat effectiveness. A powerful psychological impact was an integral and carefully thought out part of the entire Roman military system, which took into account not only the physical, but also the mental aspects of warfare. Identical armor glistening in the sun, imposing helmets with brightly colored horsehair plumes, the ominous rhythmic clanging of thousands of caligae and cingulum during the march. All of this was carefully calculated to create a terrifying image of a unified, iron discipline and utterly relentless military force. A Roman soldier was simultaneously prepared for an exhausting multi-day march through hostile territory, complex engineering work to build a fortified military camp with moats and palisades, a prolonged passive defense of a besieged fortress, and a lightning-fast, swift attack in open terrain. An experienced soldier from one legion could easily use equipment from a completely different legion without any additional training, which provided unprecedented flexibility and interchangeability in combat conditions. This standardization system allowed the Roman army to operate as a single, well-oiled machine across the vast territories of the empire. This ingenious military system was never static or ossified. It constantly evolved, adapted, and improved based on combat experience and analysis of new threats. Roman military engineers and commanders meticulously analyzed the tactics of their numerous enemies, studied their weapons and combat techniques, and then quickly made appropriate changes and improvements to the design of armor, helmets, shields, and offensive weapons. The emergence of a fundamentally new type of military threat, whether it was a new type of enemy weapon, changed combat tactics, or the need to operate in unfamiliar climatic conditions, inevitably led to the creation of a new element of protection or modification of existing equipment. The Romans did not simply copy other people's inventions, they creatively reworked and improved them, creating more sophisticated versions. It was this revolutionary, comprehensive, scientifically based engineering approach to the creation of clothing and equipment that became one of the main and most important secrets of the Roman army's unprecedented military success over many centuries. We have seen how seemingly ordinary items of clothing, tunics, sandals, cloaks, were transformed by the Romans into weapons and part of a sophisticated system of survival and domination. A legionnaire's equipment was the result of centuries of combat experience, engineering thought, and a deep understanding of human physiology in extreme conditions. It was a system in which nothing was superfluous. Which element of Roman equipment do you consider the most ingenious and why? Was it the shock-absorbing subarmalis, the versatile caliga, or the ingeniously simple lorica segmentata? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new research into the mysteries of ancient civilizations.